Hello, I'm Marion Fulker and I'm the CEO of Perth's leading think tank, the Committee for Perth. Welcome to Fact-Based Talks, an online series where you get to hear the latest research from our organisation. Fact-Based is a long-standing joint venture research program between the Committee for Perth and the University of Western Australia. We are the leaders in delivering tangible research that drives structural, cultural and behaviour change on issues that matter to the people of Greater Perth. To date, the partnership has produced more than 80 pieces of research, creating a knowledge base on issues that affect our region and its future. These include the economy, global competitiveness, transport and mobility, gender equality, and the region's demography and geography, to name but a few. Each of these is available on our website for download free of charge. This current series of fact-based talks is the opportunity to share incremental research on our Future of Work project, which aims to equip WA and its people for the changing world of work. I trust you find the information and analysis contained in this presentation stimulating and that it adds to your understanding of a complex issue that affects us all.
Thanks, Marion. Yes, as Marion said, the data is changing rapidly at the moment, so it is an interesting topic to talk about, and I think that you can all appreciate that even we'll talk about it today, and as the Future of Work project progresses, we might see additional transformational change over the next 6 months. I think we can all appreciate, though, that access to paid employment is a crucial element of a successful modern society. And Bulletin 71 really provides an overview of the evolution of jobs in WA over the past half century and identifies the types of economic drivers and global and domestic trends that have driven job change. If we move to the next slide, Holly. The Bulletin found that employment is in a constant state of flux. And over the past half century, transformational change has been evident in the industries we work in and the jobs we perform in WA. Drivers of this change include domestic policy, globalisation of trade, growth and development in other economies, technological advancements, and demographic and social change. If we move to the next slide. Jobs commonly performed in WA and Greater Perth today are very different to those performed by us, our parents and grandparents 50 years ago. In the 1960s, workers in Perth were most likely to be tradesmen, production process workers or in factories, or clerks working in public administration roles. These types of jobs remained common in the 1970s and 80s, but structural change in the 1990s shifted jobs away from sectors like manufacturing and towards sectors such as health, education, professional services and mining. Next slide, please. At an occupational level, this meant fewer people working as clerks and administrators like secretaries, PAs or call centre operators, and fewer people working in factories, and more people working as teachers, scientists, engineers, machine operators, or train and truck drivers. Service sector growth and also meant more workers in bars, restaurants, cafes, and hotels. However, it's noted that jobs in sectors like mining and construction also grew, and this is something that's relatively unique to WA and Perth, and is associated with the importance of the mining sector to the economy. Australia-wide, by comparison, mining and construction jobs have most often declined. Next slide, please. Who works and how people work has also changed. In the past, post-war era, if you're a woman living in Perth, you were 3 times less likely to be in paid employment than a man. Today, women are just 10% less likely to participate in paid employment than men. Part-time work and working past traditional retirement age has also become more common. If we move to the next slide, you'll see that drivers of industry and job change have varied over time. In the 1950s and 60s, productive industries and jobs were supported by post-war policies which aimed to achieve full employment. At that time, jobs and industries were protected by public expenditure and barriers such as tariffs and regulated trade. And at that time, rates of unemployment in WA were very low. If we move to the next slide, you can see that in the 1970s and 80s, the shift away from non-service jobs towards service sector growth was driven by global trends, and this included global oil shocks, geopolitical instability, growth in global trade, the rise of manufacturing in Southeast Asia, and advancements in technology. These drivers saw Australia's economy become less productive, growth rates slowed, international competitiveness declined, and inflation increased. Domestic policy therefore responded by focusing on tariff reform, financial deregulation and trade liberalisation, as well as modernisation and efficiency within productive sectors. An almost immediate impact of these changes were job losses in previously high employment sectors like manufacturing. It's noted that the mining and resource sector in WA grew and diversified over this era, but this didn't have a big impact on jobs at that time because it was a capital intensive industry rather than a labour intensive industry. If we move to the next slide, the 1990s were an era of structural change, which was accelerated due to the recession of 1991. A notable feature of this period was high unemployment and the fact that it took almost a decade for unemployment rates to fall to pre-recession levels, which you can see on the graph on the slide. Long-term unemployment has been identified as a key reason for this lag, and long-term unemployment was exacerbated by structural change and a skills mismatch in the economy, which meant that people who lost their jobs, say in a factory, didn't have the skills needed to take up a new job, including the new jobs that were being created, such as in healthcare. If we move to the next slide, another key factor of this period was an acceleration in trends such as the shift towards part-time employment, with many of the jobs being created suited to part-time workers, and particularly to females. This is illustrated by the relatively low unemployment rates for females seeking part-time work over this period compared to men. If we look at the next slide, we can see that by contrast to the 1990s, the 2000s in WA and Greater Perth were defined by declining unemployment or high employment. And the next slide outlines these drivers of job and industry growth during this era, and they were multiple. They included low interest rates, falling prices of goods, including lower prices for technology and software, economic growth in Asia, including growth in China and India, declining prices for manufactured goods, lengthening supply chains, technological advancements, demographic trends, including population ageing, and shifting regulatory requirements. In WA, notable impacts included record commodity prices and investment in the mining and resource sector, increased income and rates of consumption, and higher global mobility. The result was a continued decline in jobs in sectors like manufacturing and growth in sectors like mining and construction. A shift towards online services such as retail, and growth in expenditure on other services like food and accommodation, arts, recreation and culture. Other significant growth sectors included health, driven by population ageing, and growth in education. Jobs that declined over this era included those in administration, which were heavily influenced by the widespread adoption of computers and software technology. If we move to the next slide, we can see that information and communications technology and software were the technologies most commonly adopted by workplaces in Australia over this era. And the next slide shows that industries like manufacturing also became more technologically advanced. Structural change in the census periods from 2006 to 2016 was highlighted by the continued decline in jobs in manufacturing, which was due to efficiency gains rather than to a drop in output. If we move to the next slide, structural change over this period was also evidenced by growth in key professional industry sectors, including health, education, business, human resource, marketing, and the arts. If we move to the next slide, I think if we were sitting here in 2019, We'll be looking at industry and job trends of the 2000s and 2010s and expecting them to generally continue over the coming decade. However, as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has delivered an unprecedented shock to the global economy. In WA, the pandemic resulted in sudden unemployment growth from March to June, which has subsequently shown some signs of easing. ABS data indicates that as of August, jobs most impacted in WA are those in agriculture, forestry and fishing, and food and accommodation. Other heavily impacted services include information media and telecommunications, and rental hiring and real estate services. Growth has also occurred in some sectors though, and these include health and social assistance and finance and insurance sectors, as well as public administration. Moving to the next slide. Much of the commentary in the media in particular over the past 6 months have been focused towards whether the industry and job impacts of COVID-19 will be a short-term shock or whether they could lead to long-term structural reform. There is increasing discourse and evidence that trends generated by COVID-19, along with global trends such as climate change and a shift away from globalisation, could act as an accelerator of some existing industry trends, as well as initiate a new era of structural reform. In particular, researchers have identified the potential for accelerated adoption of new technologies to drive efficiency, investment in the health and health science sector, a shift to remote service delivery, jobs in construction in response to government stimulus, and a shift away from tourism, food, accommodation and retail jobs. Researchers also highlighted the potential for a shift back to local manufacturing, particularly the manufacturing of health products, as potentially driving structural reform. If we look at the next slide, from a jobs perspective, predictions in research include more jobs in the health sector, in the science sector, in technology and construction, fewer jobs in retail, administration, media, food accommodation and mining, which is due to the potential for increased automation and the impacts of climate change. There are predicted to be both winners and losers in service sectors like education and professional services, as delivery shifts online, new technologies emerge, and there's increased competition for international business. Manufacturing jobs could also be influenced positively by a shift to local production or negatively by increased automation. If we move to the next slide, before I conclude, I want to touch on some of the other trends and predictions that are currently gaining traction in the media. I'm sure many of you have heard about the impact of COVID-19 on female employment and predictions of a she-cession, or a recession characterised by a loss of jobs for women. This will be examined in the next fact-based bulletin, which looks at demographic trends. But I just wanted to note that at present, while females appear to have been slightly more impacted by unemployment than men in WA, and participation rates for women have declined at a marginally higher rate, the evidence is not yet conclusive in terms of a significantly higher impact on female workers in WA. Other predictions include reduced part-time and casual employment, particularly due to the decline in retail and hospitality employment, growth in the gig economy, and decline in the older workforce. I think at the moment the evidence is all relatively short-term and relatively limited, and so we'll be watching these trends as the Future of Work project progresses. Anecdotal evidence also indicates that some employers might have adopted to a smaller workforce, which we will examine as part of the upcoming Future of Work member survey. So just moving to the final slide, in terms of the next steps for the Future of Work project, upcoming fact-based bulletins will examine workforce demographic trends in detail and look at the link between higher education and jobs. The Future of Work community and member surveys will also provide new insights into the changing nature of jobs in WA and Perth and the impacts of COVID-19, and we'll be looking at rolling those out over the coming months. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for listening to Fact-Based Talks. Our research is available on our website to download free of charge, and you will find this bulletin and other bulletins related to the future of work and all other areas that the Committee for Perth covers on Perth and its future available there.